Admiral Klax Brightscale stood at the panoramic window of the Nexus Prime Navigation Academy, his forearms clasped behind his back as he gazed at the triple moons hanging in the violet sky. The Academy's quantum processors hummed beneath his feet, a sound that had always brought him comfort. Their calculations were perfect, precise, and absolutely reliable, just as navigation should be. Admiral said, a voice behind him. The annual trials registration numbers have arrived. Klax turned to face his assistant, Senior Navigator Pix, whose scales had taken on the nervous green tint that seemed permanent these days. Well, don't keep me waiting, Pix. My tentacles are curling with anticipation. Sir, we have an unusual applicant this year. Unusual how? Did another Zorblaxian sign up? Because I remind you, having 16 eyes does not automatically make one a better navigator. No, sir. It's a human. Klax's secondary heart skipped a beat. A human? In my navigation trials, he snatched the data pad from Pix's trembling hands. This must be a joke. They barely left their solar system 50 years ago. The data pad displayed a simple application. Too simple, really. Where were the 47 forms? The genetic history? The quantum aptitude scores? This human had only filled out the basic information section. According to regulations, Pix said, his voice barely a whisper, we can't deny any spacefaring species entry to the trials. Yes, I know the rules. I helped write them. Back when we assumed any species advanced enough for interstellar travel would at least have proper computational methods, Klax's scales flickered with irritation. What's next? They'll want to navigate by counting stars like ancient barbarians. A gentle chime interrupted his tirade. The Academy's daily navigation calculation was complete, only taking 6 days, 4 hours this time. A new record. The holographic display showed the optimal route between Nexus Prime and the Sirius Trading Hub, accounting for every gravitational body, quantum fluctuation, and space-time ripple along the way. Look at this beauty. Pix Klax gestured at the complex mathematical model floating before them. This is civilization. This is progress. Every variable calculated to the 100,000th decimal place. This is what separates us from simple animals pointing at stars and guessing. The human ship has just docked, Admiral. Klax's scales shifted to a deep purple of resignation. Fine. Let's go greet our contestant. He spat the word like it had a bad taste. But first, send the welcome package. All 47,000 pages of safety regulations, computational guidelines, and proper navigational theorems. That should keep them busy until the trials begin. As they walked through the Academy's pristine halls, Klax admired the quantum processors lining the walls, each one calculating and recalculating endless navigational possibilities. Student navigators from a dozen species sat at their terminals, their appendages flying over control surfaces as they ran their route simulations. Beautiful, isn't it? Klax said to no one in particular. Each student spends years mastering these calculations. The dedication, the precision, the... Admiral Pix interrupted. The human responded to the welcome package. Already, but it's only been 3 minutes. They couldn't possibly have. They just sent back a message saying thanks, but I brought my own sextant. Klax's scales went completely white. Their own what? I had to look it up, sir. It appears to be some kind of primitive measuring device for looking at stars. For the first time in his distinguished career, Admiral Klax Brightscale was speechless. His forearms hung limply at his sides as his brain tried to process this impossibility. Finally, he managed to speak. Pix, get me a drink. No, get me 4 drinks, 1 for each hand. The trials begin in a week, and I have a feeling I'm going to need them all. The docking bay doors opened with a soft hiss, and Admiral Klax nearly dropped all 4 of his carefully procured drinks. The human was tiny, and she was carrying what looked like ancient navigation tools in a simple leather bag. Amanda Parker, Earth Navigation Corps, she said, extending a hand. Thanks for having me. Klax stared at the offered appendage, unsure which of his 4 arms to extend. He settled for an official bow instead. Welcome to Nexus Prime Navigation Academy. I am Admiral Klax Brightscale, and this is Senior Navigator Pix. Oh, wow! The quantum processors. Amanda's eyes lit up as she looked around. They're so big. No wonder it takes a week to calculate a route. Pix's scales turned an embarrassed shade of orange. Actually, we've recently achieved a new record. 6 days, 4 hours. That's what I meant, Amanda said, clearly trying not to smile. Very impressive. Perhaps, Klax said, drawing himself up to his full height, we should discuss the parameters of your participation in the trials. There are certain standards that must be met. Of course. I brought visual aids. Amanda reached into her bag and pulled out what appeared to be a brass tube with lenses. This is a telescope, and this, she held up a metal arc with markings, is a sextant. And here's my star chart. She spread out a piece of paper, actual paper, covered in dots and lines. Klax felt his scales beginning to itch, a sure sign of rising stress levels. These are not approved navigational tools, he said. Our regulations clearly state. Actually, Amanda interrupted, pulling out a data pad. Section 47, subsection 93, paragraph 12 of your regulation states that any participating species may utilize their standard navigational methods and tools, provided they can demonstrate accuracy within acceptable parameters. Klax's secondary heart began to flutter. She'd actually read the regulations? All 47,000 pages? The stakes remain the same, he said firmly. If you pass the trials, humanity gains access to our trade routes. If you fail, you must adopt our superior computational methods. Sounds fair, Amanda said, beginning to set up her telescope. Though I should mention, the trade route thing was just to get your attention. What we really want is to teach you our methods. Teach us. Pix's scales cycled through several colors of disbelief. Well, yeah. I mean, what happens if your quantum processors break down? Or if you're in a region with unusual quantum fluctuations? Don't you have any backup systems? Backup systems, Klax repeated weakly. You know, like using stars for navigation? Basic astronomical positioning? Dead reckoning. Dead? What? Pix looked horrified. You navigate using dead things. Amanda laughed, a sound that echoed through the docking bay. It's just a term. Look, how about I show you? There's a lovely binary star system visible right now that makes an excellent reference point. This is preposterous, Klax declared, his 4 arms waving in agitation. We are the premier navigation institution in 7 galaxies. We do not need lessons from someone who can plot a course in under an hour, Amanda suggested innocently. The docking bay fell silent. Even the quantum processors seemed to hum more quietly. 1 hour, Pix whispered. Sure. Sometimes it takes 2 if there's a lot of celestial bodies to account for, but usually 1 is plenty. Klax drained all 4 of his drinks in rapid succession. Prove it. Amanda's eyes sparkled with the same light as the stars she apparently used for navigation. That's why I'm here, Admiral. That's why I'm here. The days before the trial transformed the Navigation Academy into a hive of frenzied activity. In the main computation hall, 50 of the galaxy's finest student navigators hunched over their quantum terminals, their appendages blurring as they refined their calculations. The air crackled with the energy of processors running at maximum capacity. Meanwhile, Amanda Parker sat in the Academy's outdoor garden, surrounded by actual paper star charts, humming to herself as she made small notes with a pencil. A pencil. The sight made Admiral Klax's scales itch every time he passed by. Sir Pix reported during their daily briefing, 17 more student navigators have requested transfers to other academies rather than compete against the human. Cowards, Klax muttered, though privately he understood their fear. How do you compete against someone who seemed to ignore the basic laws of computational necessity? In the student recreation area, rumors spread faster than light speed. I heard humans can navigate by looking at water, one student whispered. They call it a sextant because it has 6 eyes, said another. They navigate by listening to star songs, a third claimed, causing several appendages to wave in dismissal. But not everyone avoided the human. Young Trix, a promising first-year student with iridescent scales and an unfortunate habit of asking too many questions, found herself drawn to the garden where Amanda worked. "Excuse me," Trix said, her scales shifting through nervous patterns of blue and green. "But what are you doing?" Amanda looked up from her charts and smiled. "Hey there, I'm just double-checking some star positions. Want to see?" Trix glanced around nervously, then slithered closer. "But where's your quantum interface? Your probability matrices?" "Don't need them." "Look up there," Amanda pointed to a cluster of stars barely visible in the daylight. "See that pattern? We call that the North Star on Earth. It's actually a triple star system, but from our view it looks like one bright point. Perfect for navigation." "But how do you calculate the quantum fluctuations? The gravitational variations? The space-time distortions?" Trix's questions tumbled out in a rush. "We don't, usually. Most of those even out over interstellar distances. Here, want to try something fun?" Amanda handed Trix the sextant. From his observation post behind a quantum processor housing, Admiral Klax watched in horror as his most promising student took the primitive device in her manipulator appendages. "Now, just align the sight with that bright star there, and perfect. You just took your first celestial reading." Trix's scales blazed with excitement. But this is so simple. Why don't we learn this as a backup system?" "An excellent question," Amanda said, just loud enough for Klax to hear in his hiding spot. "Why don't you?" The next morning, Klax found a formal complaint on his desk. 17 senior instructors had reported concern about dangerous primitive influences corrupting the student body. Attached was a recording of 3 junior students singing what they called a star shanty, apparently some kind of human navigational song. "This has gone too far," Klax declared to Pix. "Look at these reports. Students refusing to complete their quantum calculations. 2 of them were caught stargazing without proper computational support, and someone replaced the cafeteria's background music with something called Space Shanties, the greatest hits." "The trials begin tomorrow," Sir Pix reminded him. "Surely things will settle down after the human fails." "And if she doesn't fail?" They both looked out the window where Amanda sat with Trix, and now 3 other students, all of them taking turns with the sextant, while she explained something using elaborate hand gestures. Sir Pix said carefully, what if there's something to their methods?" "Don't be ridiculous. Our way is better. More advanced." More Klax trailed off as he watched Trix successfully take a reading, her scales glowing with accomplishment. "More complicated," he finished weakly. In the garden below, Amanda's voice carried up to them. "Navigation isn't about having the most complex solution. It's about finding your way home, no matter what." Klax's scales itched worse than ever. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The trial chamber was a marvel of modern computational engineering. Quantum processors lined every wall, their crystalline matrices pulsing with barely contained mathematical power. Holographic displays flickered through billions of calculations per second, filling the air with a soft blue glow. "Welcome to the annual navigation trials," Admiral Klax announced to the assembled contestants. "This year's challenge: plot a safe course through the Maelstrom Nebula, accounting for all gravitational anomalies, quantum fluctuations, and temporal distortions. You have 7 standard days to complete your calculations." The Maelstrom Nebula shimmered on the main display, its swirling gases concealing thousands of navigational hazards. 50 of the finest student navigators in the galaxy settled into their computational stations, connecting their neural interfaces to the quantum network. Amanda Parker sat cross-legged on the floor in the corner she'd been assigned, spreading out her star charts and setting up her telescope near a viewport. Contestant Parker Klax said, trying to keep his scales from twitching, "Your designated quantum terminal is over there." "Oh, no thanks. I've got everything I need right here." She pulled out her sextant and a thermos of something she called coffee. "Though I wouldn't mind if someone could dim the lights a bit. Makes it easier to see the stars." Klax's 4 arms all clenched at once. "The lighting is calibrated for optimal quantum computational efficiency." "Sure, but it's giving me a headache. Plus there's this great pulsar cluster visible through the maelstrom that I want to use as a reference point." Before Klax could respond, the chamber's lighting dimmed significantly. He spun around to find Trix at the environmental controls, her scales glowing with embarrassment. Sorry, Admiral. My appendage must have slipped. The first day passed in relative calm. The alien students established their quantum links, beginning the complex calculations necessary for safe passage through the maelstrom. Amanda made herself comfortable, alternating between studying her charts and taking measurements through the viewport. By day 3, the tension in the chamber had risen considerably. 2 students had already withdrawn, their neural interfaces overloaded by the computational complexity. Amanda had taken to doing something called stretching exercises, while she waited for specific stars to become visible through her viewport. "How's everyone doing?" she asked cheerfully during a break period, offering around a package of space cookies she'd brought from Earth. "Please stop talking," muttered a Centaurian navigator, all 7 of their brain lobes pulsing with calculation stress. "You're disrupting the quantum harmony." "Sorry. Just thought people might be hungry." Taking care of the basics, she turned to Trix, who was trying very hard to look like she wasn't watching the human. "Want a cookie?" Contestant Parker Klax interrupted. "This is a serious competition, not a social gathering." "Everything's a social gathering if you try hard enough." Admiral, she grinned and took a bite of cookie. "Besides, I finished my calculations yesterday. Just double-checking a few things now." The chamber went silent. Even the quantum processors seemed to pause their humming. "Yesterday," Pix squeaked. "But that's impossible. The gravitational matrices alone take 3 days to compute." "Oh, I didn't compute those. Just used the pulsar cluster as a fixed point and worked out the relative positions of the major gravity wells. The nebula gases make some pretty convenient patterns when you look at them right." Patterns, a Rigelian student's eye stalk swiveled in confusion. "In random gas formations." "Sure. See that spiral arm there?" Amanda pointed at the holographic display. "Looks just like a question mark. Perfect marker for the big black hole at the nebula's core. And that cloudy bit that looks like a smiling face? That's where the gravitational eddies are strongest." Klax felt his scales beginning to molt, a sure sign of extreme stress. You cannot navigate one of the most dangerous regions of space using patterns that look like primitive facial expressions. Why not? They're not going to move much in the next few centuries. More reliable than computers that can break down, if you ask me. "No one asked you," Klax shouted, then quickly composed himself. "Please return to your calculations, everyone." Day 5 brought more withdrawals as the computational complexity began to overwhelm even the most advanced students. Amanda had taken to teaching Trix what she called constellations during break periods, much to Klax's horror. "See? Those 3 bright ones in a row? We call that the belt back home. Super easy reference point." Contestant Parker Klax interrupted for what felt like the 1000th time. "Are you quite certain about your calculations?" "Oh yeah, pretty sure. Though I did notice something interesting about the temporal distortions you mentioned. They follow this neat little pattern that looks like a dancing dog if you squint right. Makes them super easy to avoid." Klax's scales began changing colors so rapidly that Pix had to lead him to a quiet corner to prevent a full molting episode. By the final day, only 10 students remained in the competition, their neural interfaces glowing as they made their final computational adjustments. Amanda sat in her corner, sipping coffee and occasionally making small marks on her charts while humming something called 1,000 space miles. "Time's up," Klax announced, his voice cracking slightly. "Please submit your final navigation solutions." The remaining students began uploading their quantum calculations to the central computer. Amanda walked up and handed Klax a piece of paper. "Here you go." Drew out the whole route. "Those dotted lines are where we'll need to adjust course to account for the smiling face gravitational eddies. Oh, and I added some notes about the dancing dog temporal distortions. They've got a pretty regular rhythm once you get the hang of them." Klax stared at the hand-drawn map, his forearms trembling. This is going to work perfectly," Amanda finished with a confident smile. "Want to test it?" The verification chamber hummed with anticipation as the navigation routes were loaded into the simulator. Admiral Klax, flanked by a panel of distinguished judges from various spacefaring species, sat at the main control console. His scales had finally settled on a muted shade of anxiety. "We will test each solution in order of submission," he announced, beginning with contestant Parker's paper. The chamber's holographic display sprang to life, showing a perfect three-dimensional representation of the Maelstrom Nebula. Amanda's hand-drawn route appeared as a glowing line through the chaos. "This is preposterous," muttered Judge Lorne, their crystalline form vibrating with disapproval. "She can't possibly have accounted for all variables." "Oh, I didn't," Amanda said cheerfully. "Just the important ones." "All variables are important," Judge Lorne's crystals chimed in distress. "Initiating simulation," Klax announced, partly to prevent further argument. The virtual ship began its journey, following Amanda's plotted course. The audience gasped as it approached the first major gravitational eddy, the one Amanda had marked as the smiling face. "Notice how the ship rides the edge of the gravitational wave," Amanda pointed out, "just like surfing." "Well, I assume. I've never actually been surfing, but I've seen videos." "Surfing pics?" asked weakly. "Yeah. See, those gas formations make patterns that show exactly where the gravity waves peak. Follow the pattern, and you've got a perfect natural highway through the nebula." The simulation continued. The virtual ship glided smoothly through regions that had taken the alien navigators days to calculate, using Amanda's reference points like the dancing dog temporal distortion and that spiral that looks like my aunt's signature. But where are your quantum calculations?" Judge Lorne demanded. "Your gravitational matrices, your probability computations." "Don't need them," Amanda explained. "Look at this pulsar cluster here." She pointed to a group of rapidly spinning stars. "They pulse in a super-regular pattern, better than any clock for timing our jumps through the temporal distortions. And see this binary star system? The way their orbits interact creates this neat little arrow shape pointing right at the safe passage through the radiation field." The judges watched in stunned silence as the simulation completed its run. Perfect navigation time, zero damage, optimal fuel consumption. "This is impossible," Klax whispered. "The computational power needed to the variables, That's your problem right there," Amanda said kindly. "You're so focused on computing everything that you've forgotten how to look and see. Stars don't just sit there looking pretty. They're like giant navigation signs, if you know how to read them." "But our methods are scientifically proven," protested Judge Lorne. "Tested over thousands of years." "So are ours," Amanda replied. "Longer, actually. Humans have been using stars to navigate for as long as we've been able to look up. We just kept the knowledge even after we got computers." A small voice spoke up from the back of the chamber. "She's right." All eyes turned to Trix, who slithered forward, her scales shifting through nervous patterns. I've been studying her methods," Trix admitted. "They work. And not just for the nebula. I can find my way anywhere now, even if all our quantum systems failed." "Backup systems," Amanda nodded. "Always good to have them. Plus, there's something kind of nice about looking up at actual stars instead of just running numbers, don't you think?" Klax looked from his quantum displays to the viewport, then back again. For the first time, he noticed how the nebula's gas formations really did create recognizable patterns. How had he never seen it before? "The simulation results are clear," Judge Lorne announced reluctantly. "Contestant Parker's route is optimal." "Thanks," Amanda beamed. "Now, about those trade routes, actually, forget that. Who wants to learn how to use a sextant? First lesson's free." "I have a question." Pix raised one of his appendages. "What happens if you can't see the stars? If there's too much interference?" "Oh, that's where it gets really fun." Amanda's eyes lit up. "Ever heard of dead reckoning?" Pix fainted. "All right, everyone," Amanda announced to the gathered crowd in the simulation chamber. "Let's compare routes." The holographic display split into 11 sections: Amanda's hand-drawn path and the 10 quantum-calculated routes. The differences were immediately apparent. "Notice how all your computed routes avoid the gravitational eddies completely," Amanda pointed out. "That's like walking an extra mile around a river when there's a perfectly good bridge right there." "But the quantum calculations clearly show," Judge Lorne began. That you're overthinking it, Amanda finished. Watch this. Computer, overlay the natural energy flows of the nebula gases. The display shifted, showing swirling patterns of energy that looked suspiciously like. Are those arrows? Klax asked incredulously. Nature's road signs, Amanda confirmed. The nebula gases naturally flow along the paths of least resistance. All we had to do was follow them. But our calculations took into account every possible variable, protested one of the remaining student navigators. And that's exactly the problem, Amanda explained, pulling up her simple star chart. You're so busy measuring every speck of space dust that you're missing the big picture. Look here, see how these three pulsars form a perfect triangle. That's not just pretty, it's a warning sign about the temporal distortion zone ahead. The alien judges huddled together, their various appendages, crystals, and scales all showing signs of distress as they compared the routes. Amanda's path was not only faster but used 43% less fuel than the best computational solution. This goes against everything we teach, Klax said, his scales now a confused mix of colors. All our advanced algorithms are amazing, Amanda interrupted. Really, they are. But they're tools, not solutions. Humans learned a long time ago that the best technology is the one that works when everything else fails. To demonstrate, she pulled out her sextant again. This doesn't need power, doesn't need quantum processors, doesn't even need maintenance beyond keeping it clean. And it's never wrong. Never wrong, Judge Lorne's crystals vibrated skeptically. Well, okay, sometimes I'm wrong when I use it, Amanda admitted. But that's on me, not the tool. And that's another thing, when I make a mistake, I know right away because the stars look wrong. How long does it take you to spot an error in a quantum calculation? The uncomfortable silence answered her question. Let me show you something else, Amanda said, pulling up the navigation logs from her trip to Nexus Prime. See these course corrections. Each one was made because I looked out the window and something didn't match my expectations. No computer needed, just good old-fashioned human pattern recognition. Trix, who had been studying the displays intently, suddenly spoke up. It's like learning to read. Once you know the patterns, they're obvious. Exactly, Amanda beamed. The universe writes its instructions in lights across the sky. We just have to remember to look up from our screens sometimes. Klax found himself moving closer to the viewport, really looking at the stars for the first time in decades. These patterns, they've always been there. Since the beginning of time, Amanda said softly. Every species that ever crossed an ocean or walked through a desert figured this out. The stars are the original navigation system. She pulled out her treasured paper star charts one more time, and the best part, unlike your quantum processors, they never need a software update. That got a laugh, even from Judge Lorne, whose crystals had begun to shine with a new understanding. There's room for both methods, Amanda continued. Use your quantum computers for the complex stuff. But maybe also teach your students to look up once in a while? Trust their eyes, trust their brains. Trust intuition, Klax asked, the word feeling strange in his mouth. That too, but mostly trust the fact that the universe wants to be understood. It leaves clues everywhere. We just have to be humble enough to see them. The judges looked at each other, then at the still-running simulation showing the elegant simplicity of Amanda's solution. I believe Judge Lorne said carefully that we may need to revise our curriculum. 6 months later, the Nexus Prime Navigation Academy looked very different. The quantum processors still hummed away, but now every classroom had large windows facing the stars. Students carried both computational tablets and simple brass sextants. And in the garden where Amanda had first shared her knowledge, a new class was in session. Remember, Trix told her students, her scales glowing with teacher's pride, the dancing dog temporal distortion is easiest to spot during the third moon's apex. And yes, this will be on the test. The Academy's newest course, Fundamental Stellar Navigation, had become its most popular offering. Even some of the senior instructors had swallowed their pride and enrolled. In his office, Admiral Klax reviewed the latest student performance reports with a mix of amazement and chagrin. Navigation accuracy was up 47%. Emergency response times had improved by 89%. and fuel consumption across all training flights had dropped by a third. Sir Pix entered with the daily reports. We've received another 100 applications for the hybrid navigation program. Send them all acceptance letters, Klax said, not looking up from his own studies. He was trying to memorize what humans called constellations, and it wasn't going well. And Pix, what's the one that looks like a soup spoon again? The Big Dipper, sir. Though Amanda says it's technically part of Ursa Major, the Great Bear. Right, a bear. Because that's obviously what those stars look like. He made another note in his increasingly crowded study guide. The changes hadn't come easily. Several senior faculty members had resigned in protest when the new curriculum was announced. They'd been quickly replaced by a wave of young instructors eager to combine the best of both worlds. Even Judge Lorne had been spotted in the garden late at night, practicing with a sextant while their crystals glowed with concentration. Oh, and Sir Pix added with poorly concealed amusement, "Your astronomy homework is due tomorrow. Amanda asked me to remind you that saying the quantum processors ate my star charts won't work as an excuse this time." Klax's scales rippled with embarrassment. He'd been struggling with the basics of astronomical navigation like a first-year student. Just yesterday, he'd confused a planet for a star and plotted a course that would have taken him straight through a sun. Did you know, he said, changing the subject, that humans used to navigate entire oceans using nothing but stars and string? No quantum anything, just looking up and knowing where they were. Yes, sir. You've mentioned that about 12 times this week. It's just so elegant. Klax turned to his viewport, where the Academy's 3 moons hung in the violet sky. We spent thousands of years making navigation more complicated, and they spent thousands of years making it simpler. A cheer from the garden interrupted his musing. Trix's students had successfully completed their first solo stellar triangulation. Among them was a young Rigelian who'd been at the bottom of his quantum computation class, but showed a natural gift for reading stellar patterns. Sir Pix gestured to the clock. Your beginner's astronomy class starts in 10 minutes. Klax gathered his study materials, including the brass sextant Amanda had given him as a graduation present after he'd finally passed the basic certification. He'd had it modified to work with all 4 of his arms, though he still occasionally pointed it at his own eye by mistake. You know what the humans say, Pix? The stars guide those who are wise enough to look up. Actually, sir, I don't think they say that at all. Well, they should, Klax said firmly, his scales glowing with newfound wisdom. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go learn the difference between a pulsar and a quasar. Again. As he walked to class, he couldn't help but notice how beautiful the stars looked. They'd always been there, of course, but now they weren't just points of light. They were signposts, guides, and reminders that sometimes the simplest solution was written in lights across the night sky. He just had to remember to look up.